Hi, I'm Pat Smith with Involve Media. We're an Adobe partner and we do quite a bit of Captivate training. And a topic that comes up in many of our classes is how do you track whether a user has seen certain parts of the project? So typical use case, you might have a project with several different scenarios and you want to ensure that the user has gone through each of the scenarios before you send them to the quiz or provide summary information. So we've created this tutorial on how to track where a user has been using variables and advanced actions, and then change the behavior of the project based on those variables. So there's a couple basic steps. Number one, you're going to need a scenario menu slide, and this is going to be the launch point for the user to actually get to the individual scenarios. And then, of course, you're going to have to create the individual scenarios. We've done these first two steps already in the interest of time. So let me show you what we've got here in this project. We have our basic scenario menu slide, and this project has two scenarios, so I have two buttons that are going to take me to the start point for those individual scenarios. So I've got scenario 1 and I've got scenario 2. Scenario 1 is right here. This is the first slide of scenario 1, and then there's the final slide of scenario 1, and it has a button on it that will return me to the scenario menu, which is our slide 4. Then I've got scenario 2. Also has an introductory slide and then has a final slide. It also has a return to menu button that will bring me back to the scenario menu. And then we have a final slide that's going to be the completion slide, or where I want to take the user after they've completed both scenarios. If we go back to our menu slide, there's also a couple other elements on this slide. There are two check marks, and these are little graphical elements that I want to put on the slide if the user has seen that particular scenario. And then if they've completed both scenarios, I want to show this continue button here, which takes me to that final congratulations slide. So this continue button and the two check marks are set as visible in output unchecked, which essentially means they're going to be invisible on the project. And what we're going to do is use an advanced action to show these particular objects when the appropriate time appears. So the next thing that we need to do is create a variable for each scenario. So we're going to create a scenario 1 variable and a scenario 2 variable, and their initial values are going to be 0. And as the user takes that particular scenario, we're going to set the value to 1. So to do this, we need to create some variables. So under the project menu, there's a variables option, and we're going to click the add new, and we're going to create a variable for scenario 1 called S1, and its initial value is going to be 0. And I'm going to save. I'm going to add another one, variable S2, also with initial value of 0, and hit save. So now I've got my two variables. And now what I want to do is actually assign the value of 1 to those variables when they actually get through the individual scenarios themselves. So I'm going to go down to my last slide of each scenario. So this is my scenario 1. This is the last slide. And what I want to do is assign my variable a value of 1 because they've now completed scenario 1. To do this, we're going to use the slide action. So on slides, there's an action for on enter and on exit. So when we enter this slide, I want to set that variable to 1. And we can do that using the assign action. It asks me which variable do I want to assign. So this is our scenario 1, so I'm going to use the S1 variable, and I'm going to set it to 1. I'm going to do the exact same thing on my scenario 2 last slide. So this is my last slide for scenario 2. We're going to use the on enter action for assign variable S2, also with a value of 1. So now what happens when I come to this particular slide, my S2 variable is going to be set to 1. So now what we want to do is go back to my menu slide, and what I want to have happen is some different behavior. I want these check marks to show up if they've gone through those scenarios. So we do that through an advanced action. So under project, we have advanced actions. And this is going to be a conditional advanced action. So by selecting conditional actions, I get a slightly different panel here. And we have different tabs at the top here. So I can have several different conditions being evaluated independently. So the first one is going to be my S1 condition. So I'm going to call it S1. And I'm going to create the condition. So by double clicking the blank area here, I get a drop down, and I'm going to select variable. And my variable is going to be my S1 variable. So if I scroll all the way down, I have the user variables at the bottom. So my S1 variable. And I want to select is equal to, and then I'm going to select literal because I actually want to put the value of 1 in here. So what this is going to tell me is if the variable S1 is equal to the value of 1, then do this action. So the action that I want to create is to show my S1 check mark. Go down and select S1 check mark. So now when this is true, I will do this action. We're going to create a second conditional, the S2 conditional, and it's going to be very similar. We're going to say variable S2 is equal to the literal value 1, and in this case we're going to actually show the S2 check mark, and I'm going to hit save. So now I have two conditions that are going to be executed for this one action. So I need to give this action a name. We're going to call it reveal checks, and we're going to hit save. Now we need to actually fire this particular advanced action. So we're going to use that onEnter action for the slide again. And that onEnter has an execute advanced actions. And there's my reveal check script. Since that's the only one I have, that's the only one that's listed. So now what happens is when you enter this slide, it's going to do that evaluation of the variables. Now the first time I come in here, my variables are going to be 0. And then if I go through the scenarios, the next time I come back to the menu slide, those check marks should show up if I've gone through a particular scenario. So let's give this a little preview and see how it looks. So if I select my scenario, I jump to that particular scenario, hit the continue button to go to the next slide, and then I'm going to hit the return to menu button, and now my check mark for scenario 2 is being shown because my S2 variable is now set to 1. I'm going to go through my scenario 1, and now my check mark for scenario 1 is completed. Now I haven't done the complete action because I knew now I want the continue button down here to show up when I go through both scenarios. Also, I only want people to go through these scenarios once. Right now I can continue to go through this scenario as many times as I want. So if I want to just make sure they're going through the scenario once and only once, I need to disable these buttons once they've gone through those scenarios. So we're going to make some additions to our advanced action. So I'm going to go back to the project menu and select advanced actions. And in the right drop down here, I can pull up my existing actions, so my reveal check action. So what I want to do is, on my S1 condition, I actually want to disable that S1 button, so that once I go through the scenario, that button will not be able to be fired any longer. So there's an action called disable. So I'm going to scroll down to disable, and I'm going to select my S1 button. So my S1 button is this button here. My S2 button is right here. And I'm going to do the same thing on the S2 condition. So if S2 is equal to 1, meaning I've seen that scenario, I'm going to disable that button. And so this will be my S2 button. And now I need to create my final condition. And this condition is if S1 and S2 are equal to 1, then I want to show my menu continue button. So we're going to call this the continue tab, and here we're going to create 2 lines of conditions. So again, we're going to select variable, and we're going to say down at the bottom S1 is equal to literal value 1. Now we're going to add a second condition, again variable S2 is equal to the literal 1. So what this condition is saying is if S1 is equal to 1 and S2 is equal to 1, then do this action. So this is the condition, meaning, hey, they've seen all the scenarios. I want to be able to give them the option to go to the final slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually show my menu continue button, which is this continue button right here. And I'm going to update my script. Now I don't need to reassign this. It's still already assigned. I've just changed some of the programming for that. So now when we do a preview of this, if I select scenario and continue, and then I'm going to return to the menu. Now if I click on the Scenario 1 button, nothing is happening any longer. I've disabled that button. If I click on Scenario 2, return to the menu, now Scenario 2 is disabled, Scenario 1 is disabled, and my Continue button is now showing. I hit the Continue, and I jump to the final slide. So just with those couple variables, I can track whether someone has gone down a particular path and then change the behavior of our menu slide based on that. Couple things, additional tips. Number one is if you're creating advanced actions, you definitely want to start naming your objects something that's meaningful. Very easy to get confused when you're creating an advanced action and you're trying to display a button and it's button 6295 versus menu continue button. So definitely give your buttons names, and you do that through the label panel in the upper right in the properties panel for your different objects. Second thing is, if you are wanting to make sure that users are being controlled and going through each of the different scenarios, you pretty much have to take the play bar and navigation off so that they can't jump around what you're trying to create here. If you have a play bar, the users can actually hit next slide or use the scrub bar to sort of jump past the end of your scenarios without forcing them to go back to the menu slide. So if you want to actually control where the user's going, you need to pretty much take the play bar off, and you need to take navigation off your table of contents. Otherwise the users can kind of blow up your different paths that you're trying to create. All right. So hopefully that will give you basic information on how to actually create variables and use advanced actions to change behavior based on whether someone's gone on a particular path. Thanks for watching.